Welcome to part 2 of a two-part video about understanding and breaking down NDIS plans. This is the latest video from the Spark Disability Media Resources Hub. Last time round, you might remember that we looked at some of the terminology and the language that is commonly used in NDIS plans. And today, what I'm going to be looking at is the different sections of an NDIS plan, the information that's included in those sections, and how that information and NDIA conditions can influence the way that people can use their plan funding. NDIS plans include 3 particular sections. The first of these sections is called the About Me section. Now, About Me includes personal information about the person at the center of the plan. For example, their contact details, their phone number, their address. It also includes some background information that the person chooses to share with the NDIS about their living situation, the people around them who support them, things that they do day to day and week to week. Importantly, the About Me section also includes information about informal community and mainstream supports that the person may already have engaged with or that may be available to them to help them to make progress towards the goals that they've recorded on their plan. The second section in the plan is the plan goals, what the person actually wants to achieve, not just during this plan, but also into the future. On an NDIS plan, plan goals come in 2 different kinds. Larger, longer-term goals that may take 1, 2, 3 plan periods, perhaps longer, before a person is in a position to really achieve that goal. Or they can be smaller, more immediate goals, perhaps as part of that larger goal. A good, well-considered NDIS plan will include information in the goals section about how non-NDIS support services, for example, informal, community, mainstream supports, can also help a person to make progress towards achieving their goals. The third section in an NDIS plan is the funded support section. This is the section that lays out how much funding the NDIA has included in a person's plan, how that funding is going to be managed, and if the NDIA has placed any conditions on how the funding can be used to engage disability supports. As I mentioned before, the About Me section of the plan includes personal details about the person whose plan it is. Now, this is an example plan. And I wanted to highlight the section of the plan that's circled in orange there. If we blow that up a little bit, make that bigger, you can see that there is a fair bit of information about the person's living arrangements, the kind of support that they receive day to day, and the things that they like to do. There are a couple of important points to keep in mind about this information when it's included in your plan. The first point is that only information that you have agreed to include at this point should be on your plan. If you're not happy with the way something is worded, or if information that you're not comfortable sharing with people who might be looking at your plan has been included, you can contact the NDIA or contact a local area coordinator to ask them to make some changes so that you're happy with it. The second thing to keep in mind is that the NDIA uses information in this section of your plan when they're considering what non-NDIS supports are available and are around you to provide you with support. To give you a couple of examples from this plan, in this paragraph here, the statement says that the person finished high school 2 years ago and they're now working part-time at their local supermarket. In terms of the NDIS, the local supermarket, the person's boss or their manager at that supermarket represents a community support, because that manager has an obligation to make adjustments to the way the person does their work at the supermarket to help them to do that work effectively and successfully. A second example is in the second paragraph there, where the statement mentions that the person's mother helps them to shower and to get ready for the day, and they also receive assistance with meal preparation. This is an example of an informal support. And again, the NDIA takes this into account when they look to approve a person's plan. As I mentioned earlier, the goals section of a person's plan lays out both short-term and longer-term goals. Now, when you see an NDIS plan for real, the plan format is for the short-term goals to come first, with the longer-term goals afterwards. However, in reality, when we're planning things in life, it's often helpful to start thinking about the bigger goal, the longer-term goal that we want to achieve, and work backwards to identify smaller steps that need to happen before we can achieve that larger goal. These smaller steps could then be included in a person's NDIS plan as the short-term goals, something for them to work through as immediate priorities to put them in a position to be able to achieve their longer-term goals. Here's an example of what the goal section might look like. I'm going to use the example person that we were discussing in part 1 of this video series, how they wanted to go to university and receive their degree. So their longer term goal, as I've highlighted here in orange, is that they want to graduate from university after completing a degree in engineering, for example. You might recall our person, and here's where they want to get to, their degree. Now, as part of that, their longer term goal, there are some steps that we identified that they would need to complete to be in a position to graduate from university. The first of those was finding new accommodation to allow them to be close to university and be able to attend classes in person. So that's step 1. Step 2 was familiarizing themselves with public transport services, bus services, train services, maybe tram services if they're in Melbourne, to allow them both to attend university but also to go other places in the community, for example, to their local shopping centre. Step 3 was familiarizing themselves with the university's computer systems and administration systems so that they can complete assignments and hand in their work and maintain their enrollment. This is the longer term goal, and this is how it can be broken down into smaller steps that can then represent the short term goals in a plan. And you can see from the example that one of those steps that we identified as part of the longer term goal has become one of the short term goals. So specifically, the short term goal is, I want to move into a new place to live so that I can be near my university by the end of this plan. Even with a short term goal, a good, well-considered plan will break down that goal into further steps. For example, in this case, in order to be able to find that place to live close to the university, our example person will need to identify what kind of accommodation would be the most appropriate for them. Is it private rental? Is it living in accommodation that's owned by the university? Is it applying for community or public housing? Once that's been decided, they would then need to submit applications or register to actually live in their preferred accommodation. They may need to develop a budget to ensure they have enough money to cover their rent, groceries, bills, and other costs. And finally, once all of those other steps are complete and they're ready to move into their new home, they will need to actually move their belongings from their current family home into their new accommodation. A detailed NDIS plan will take all of these things into account, and it will map out step by step what needs to happen to help the person to achieve their goals. It's really important to keep in mind that big goals can be broken down into smaller steps. And those smaller steps can be spread across several NDIS plans. They don't all have to be achieved straight away. The final section of any plan is the funded supports. The funded support section is generally spread across several pages. This screenshot is an example of the first page of the funded support section. This page, again, is explaining some of the terminology that the NDIS uses. We'll go through these quickly now, and then we'll come back to them later on as we work through the funded supports that have been included in our example plan. The first point to keep in mind is the way that the funded supports have been set up in the plan. There are three different ways that the supports can be managed. The first is what's called self-management. Second is plan management. And third is NDIA management of the supports. I'm not going to go into great detail about the differences between the three here. What is important to keep in mind is that the way the funded supports are managed can affect the person's choice of service providers and also potentially affect the way that they choose to allocate their support funding to different kinds of services. The next term to keep in mind is what's called stated supports. Sometimes the NDIA places conditions on the way that support funding can be used, and stated supports is one example of this. What stated supports means is that the NDIA has included support funding that must be spent on a particular support service. While the person at the center of the plan doesn't necessarily have choice in terms of the kind of service that's being purchased, they can still decide which service provider they would like to assist them and provide that service. The next term that you might see sometimes in a plan is in-kind. In-kind support services are linked to the introduction of the NDIS. You may be aware that the NDIS is still a very new government program. In most places, it's been around for less than 5 years. In-kind support services are services where governments at different levels, Commonwealth, state, or local governments, have already committed funding to providing a service outside of the NDIS. This means that if someone has been accessing one of these in-kind services, they will need to continue accessing that service through their existing service provider. There is no choice for the person as to whether they can change their provider or not, and where they go to access the service. The final term to keep in mind when looking through the funded supports in a plan is quote required. Quote required represents in principle approval of a support by the NDIA. The NDIA has accepted that a person requires that particular support and that it is reasonable and necessary to approve that support for them. However, at the time that their plan was approved, there may not have been enough information available to include the exact and correct funding amount in the plan. So quote required represents an acknowledgement by the NDIA that the person can provide that information during the plan period. And once that information has been received by the NDIA, a planner will look at it and look at including or making the funding available in the person's plan. So how do those terms that we've just been discussing actually play out in the support budgets in a person's funded supports? Well, let's start by looking at an example of a core support budget. So here is an example core support budget page. Now, the first thing that you might notice on this page is that at the top of the page, in big bold letters and numbers, is the total funded supports for the plan. However, even more important than the total funded supports is making sure that the funding has been included in the right place, in the correct support budget, and that it's managed in the right way to suit the person at the center of the plan. It's no good having a plan, for example, that might be $200,000 if all of that funding is in the capacity building budget, when what the person needs is support services that should be claimed from the core supports. So the total funded supports is a useful headline, but it doesn't provide the detail that can really help you to understand whether your plan is going to work for you or not. In our example plan, this person has $93,500 approved in their core support budget. Most of this funding, $90,000 of it, is plan managed. And that means that the person can use the funding to pay for different kinds of support services as they need. For example, they might require some personal care support at home, as well as some support to go out in the community. And they may also require a little bit of extra support at work beyond what their manager or their supervisor might otherwise provide to them. Because that $90,000 is all managed in the same way, it's all plan managed, the person therefore has choice about how much of that money they choose to spend in each of those three different areas. The remaining $3,500, though, has been included for transport assistance, and it's managed in a different way in our example plan here. This person's transport assistance funding is going to be paid to them in parts every 2 weeks into their bank account. What this means is, because their transport funding is not plan managed like the rest of their core supports, they must make sure that when they use that money that's paid into their bank account, that it is only used to pay for disability transport supports. For example, taxi services, or maybe the person's service provider runs a bus service, or perhaps they have an individual support worker who provides them with transport assistance as well. Next, we have the capacity building support budget. Again, here's an example of what that page looks like on a plan. Now, all of the support budgets are linked in one way or another to at least one of the goals that are recorded on the plan. That is particularly the case with the capacity building support budget, because the NDIA includes capacity building supports in a person's plan to help them develop skills and abilities and their independence to be able to progress towards achieving the goals as they're recorded on the person's plan. So the way that those goals are recorded and what areas of the person's life they cover can affect the way the NDIA makes decisions, which in turn can help to make clear why the plan has been set up in the way that it is. We have an example of a stated support here as well. Perhaps you remember that the core support budget in this plan was plan managed, the $90,000. So the improved life choices support category, which is part of the capacity building support budget, is the support category in which funding for a person's plan management service is included. Funding for plan management services is generally included in people's plans as a stated support, because the NDIA wants to make sure that that money is used to purchase plan management services. The other support category in our example here is the improved daily living category, also known as the CB daily activity category. You might notice that the $17,500 that's been included in this plan is also plan managed, just like the core support budget was on the previous page. It is very common to see funding included in the improved daily living support category in people's plans, because this category covers support services such as consultations with allied health therapists, for example, physiotherapists or occupational therapists, can help a person to develop a therapy program. Other support services that can be covered by the improved daily living category are things like a support worker to assist the person to work through that therapy program that they've developed with their therapist, or perhaps training and education for a person's family members and carers to help them to provide effective support to the person at the center of the plan. Ultimately, though, the improved daily living category is about funding support services that help the person at the center of the plan to build their skills, develop their abilities, and increase their independence in their daily life. The final support budget is the capital support budget. In our example here, this person has some funding included for assistive technology and also for vehicle modifications. Their assistive technology funding has been included, according to the comment on the plan, has been included for funding for repairs and maintenance on their disability equipment. The second support that's been included in this person's capital support budget is vehicle modifications, and that's been included as a quote required support, meaning that potentially in this case what may have happened is that the NDIA has accepted the need for the person to have some modifications made to their car. Perhaps they need special driving controls because they're not able to use the foot pedals as in a regular car. Or perhaps they need a hoist to help them load and unload specific disability equipment. At the time that the plan was approved, however, the information available to a local area coordinator or to the NDIA planner may not have included the specific price of the equipment and the modifications required. In that case, the planner has considered the information available, agreed that the modifications are necessary and reasonable. What is required is a quote from an equipment provider to determine exactly how much funding is needed in the plan. The information I've provided here and the example that I've gone through is an individual example. It's only one possible way that a person's plan might have been set up and approved by the NDIA. And every NDIS plan will be different in some way from each other. Hopefully, though, what I've managed to do here is to clear up a few things and make it easier to understand NDIS plans as they're developed and approved by the NDIA. You can check out the Spark Disability website or the NDIS website for more information if you need to help you understand your plan. Have a look in the description section below this video. If you're still not sure and you need some help understanding your plan, you can call us on 1300 921 732 or email hello@sparkdisability.com.au. Remember, we're here to help you find your spark. Thanks for watching. Keep an eye out for our future videos as well.